I'm going to show you step by step how to count cards in Blackjack. And if you do everything correctly, it's guaranteed that you will make money in the long run. There's only 3 things you need to do. The first is memorize basic strategy. The second is count cards. And the third is money management. There are lots of nuances beyond this, but I'm going to just focus on the high level and explain everything to you. At a minimum, you want to memorize basic strategy, because oftentimes you play blackjack when the count is not in your favor. So you have to use the odds. Meaning, if you have a 15 against the dealer's 4, you stand. If you have a 15 against the dealer's 9, you hit. If you have a soft 18 against the dealer's 6, you double down. If the dealer has a 7, you stand. If they have a 10, you hit. This has to be automatic, and you have to follow these rules. A lot of people won't hit a hard 16 against a 9 or 10. They don't want to bust. There's a good chance you're going to lose the hand whether you hit or stay. But if you hit, you'll lose less often. You could find this chart online. Just search basic blackjack strategy. You can email me and I'll email you this chart. I put it together so I can print it out and it looks nice. Also, by creating my own Excel spreadsheet, it just helps me remember it easier. There are some things that are easy to remember. You always double down when you have a hard 11. A hard 11 is when you have a 7 and a 4. This is a hard 11. Here's an example of a hard 12, a 7 and a 5. Here's an example of a hard 13, a 7 and a 6. Here's a soft 13. The term soft means an ace is part of the hand. They call it soft because you cannot bust from hitting again. For instance, if you had this hand and you hit, and the dealer peeled over a 9, you would not have 22. Because a deuce plus an ace is 11, that's 13, plus 9 is 22. But an ace could be 1 or 11. So instead of using 11, you would use 1. So now you have a 12. 9 plus 1 plus 2 is 12. So if you have a soft 18, an ace and a 7, you would double down on a 2 through 6, stand on 7 and 8, hit on 9, 10, or ace. The easiest ones to remember are the hard 11, you always double down no matter what the dealer has. Hard 17, you always stand whatever the dealer has. Soft 20, you always stand. When you have 2 8s, you always split. When you have 2 10s, it could be a 10 and a 10, or a jack and a 10, or a king and a queen. You always stand. And when you have 2 aces, you always split. When you get a little deeper into card counting, this may change a little bit. But don't worry about that now. Just memorize this chart. Because if you memorize this chart and do basic counting, you will win. There are things called deviations, where if you have a count above a certain number or below a certain number, then this chart may change. But that's the very last step, the deviations. It takes a long time to memorize this chart and count perfectly. Once you do those 2 things, then you can move on to the advanced stuff. The math behind counting cards is extremely basic. It's elementary school math. But it does get a little confusing trying to keep track of all the numbers. The way it works is if you see a 2, that's a +1, a 3, that's also +1, 4, 5, or 6, they're all +1s. If you see a 7, 8, or 9, that's a 0. But if you see a 10, jack, queen, king, or ace, that's -1. So let me show you an example. If this is your hand, jack and 7, then it's -1. You ignore the 7, because 7 is 0. Jack is -1, so the count is -1. If the person sitting next to you has a 2 and a 3, then you add 2 to the count, because a 2 is +1, a 3 is +1. So now the count is 1. -1, jack is -1, 7 is 0, plus 2. 2 is +1, 3 is +1. So 2 minus 1 equals 1. The count is 1. The easiest way to count is to wait for the dealer to deal everybody 2 cards. So say this is the board. The dealer has a jack. We don't know what the dealer's whole card is. If you were sitting right here and you had a 7 and an 8, you can do a quick scan of the table. You know your hand is 0 because a 7 is 0 and 8 is 0. So you could ignore your hand. The person next to you has queen, queen. So that's -2. In your head, you have to keep track of -2. Then you look at the next pair, and it's a king, which is -1, and a 3, which is +1. So you ignore that. They cancel each other out. Same thing with the next hand, +1, -1. So you cancel 3 hands out. Your hand is canceled out, 0, 0, and these 2 hands are canceled out. So it's just -2. You look at the dealer's card, a jack, you know that's a -1. So in your head, -3. So if you have a 15, you have to hit. That's basic strategy. And if you hit and you get a 5, now you have 20. But the count is -2. It's -3 plus 1. 5 is +1. So in your head, you have to think -2. And the person with a 20 would stay, the person with a 13 would hit. If they hit and got an ace, in your head, you -1. So now the count is -3. The more you do it, the quicker you get. And sometimes you pick up strategies. Like for example, if I have 3 and 3, I know that's a +2. And if the person next to me has queen and queen, that's -2. So if I see these 2 hands, I just ignore both of them because I know +2 and -2 equals 0. You also have to calculate your hand because you have to hit or stay while keeping the count in your head. That's by far the hardest part, especially if the dealer or pit boss or someone sitting next to you starts talking and they throw out some numbers. For example, if the count is 13 and the person next to you says, on July 15th, I hit $10,000 on a slot machine. Those things really mess you up, and the person next to you isn't trying to confuse you. Sometimes they're just talking to you. But it's like playing a sport. The more you do it, the better you get. The next part of counting is getting the true count. If you're keeping track of the count, the higher the count gets, the more in favor for us. So if we had a +10, that's much better for us than a -10. If the count was -10, that means a lot of high cards came out because a high card is negative. If the count was +10, that means a lot of low cards came out. When the shoe is heavy and high cards, that's good for us. So if the count is 10, we have to estimate how many decks are left in the shoe. If you're playing an 8-deck shoe, and say you estimate the dealer has dealt out 3 decks, that means there's 5 decks left in the shoe. So you take the count divided by the number of decks, and you get the true count of 2. The higher the true count, the better. So if you're at a 25 minimum table, and say that's your bet when the count is low or negative, that's your base bet. Once the count hits 2, then I double my bet. Now I'm at $50. Say as time goes on, the count gets to 12, and I estimate there's 4 decks left in the shoe. Then my true count is 3, so I multiply my base bet by 3. The point is, you want to raise your bet as the count gets higher, and you want to bet the minimum when the count is low or negative. Or better yet, not even play the hand, maybe get up and go to the bathroom. This is where bankroll management comes in. If you only have $500, you can't bet $200 a hand, because even in a good situation, you might only be a 53% chance of winning. You'll never have like a 90% chance of winning. Your chance of winning will be a little better than a casino if you do everything perfectly and the count is in your favor. That's why over time you will make money if you do everything correctly. And the more money you wager, the more money you're gonna win. If your min bet was $100, you'll make a lot more money than somebody with a min bet of 25. Because if your min bet was 100, then you'd be betting 200 when the true count is 2, 300 when the true count is 3. But you need a good bankroll just in case you lose money. In the short term, you can lose a lot of money. But if you play enough hands, you will win. Let me explain why the house has the advantage. There's only one reason the house has the advantage, is because you can bust before them. For instance, if you have a king and a 5 and the dealer is showing an ace and you hit and you get a 7, then you bust and the dealer takes your money. Now let's say after you bust, other people play their hand and then it gets back to the dealer at the end. The dealer has an ace, they turn over their whole card, and it's a 5, so they have 16. The dealer has to hit on 16 and they have to stay on 17. So if the dealer has 16 or below, they have to hit. If they have 17 or above, they have to stay. So the dealer hits, they get a queen. Now they have a 16. So they have to hit again. They always have to hit on a 16. And let's say the dealer gets a 9. The dealer busts. They went over 21. So all the people that are still in the hand get paid. Everybody wins unless you busted, which you did. You didn't get the opportunity to see the dealer play. You had to play your hand first. So that's the only advantage the house has. If you both bust, you lose money. One of the biggest reasons you want to see a lot of high cards left in the deck is because you're more likely to get a blackjack. When the shoe is really heavy in aces and tens, you're much more likely to get a blackjack than if the shoe is really heavy in 2 through 6s. And the reason it's a big benefit is because you get paid extra when you get a blackjack. You get paid 3 to 2. If you bet $100 and got a blackjack, you would keep your $100 and the dealer would give you $150. So you get paid 3 to 2. There are a lot of casinos offering 6 to 5 blackjack. Do not play at those tables. A lot of the advantage is getting paid the bonus for hitting a blackjack. Also, the more high cards in the deck, the more predictable it is. What I mean is if the dealer is showing a 6, it's more likely they're going to have a 10 if we know the shoe is really heavy in 10s. And that's to our benefit if we can predict the dealer's whole card more accurately. If you just focus on doing 3 things, memorize this chart, keep track of the count and true count, and manage your money well, you'll do fine in the long term. There are some deviations to consider, but I wouldn't worry about deviations until you master those 3 things. For example, if the count is positive, you would stay on a hard 16 against a dealer's 10. And if the true count is above a 3, you would stay on a hard 16 against a dealer's ace. Memorizing all the deviations will benefit you, but if you focus too much time on them, it will detract from the meat of the operation, which is memorizing this and counting cards to perfection. Let's talk about insurance. You'll probably hear people say never take insurance, but it may be a good bet if the true count is really high. For instance, if the true count is above a 3, it's worthwhile to take insurance because a dealer is much more likely to have a 10 beneath that ace. To give you an example, if the dealer has an ace showing, that's their up card, they would ask the table if anybody wants to buy insurance. Let's say you have $50 on the table. That's your bet in the hand. If you did not want insurance, then the dealer would look at their whole card, and if it was a 10, they would flip it over and everybody would lose. Unless, of course, someone had blackjack, they would tie. They wouldn't lose anything. Now, let's say you wanted to take insurance. You had $50 on the table. That was your bet. If you want to buy insurance, you can place half your bet on the table. And the dealer did have a blackjack. They would pay you 2 to 1. They would give you 2 more $25 chips, but they would take away your $50 chip because you lost the hand. So you would break even for the hand. Let's say, for instance, the dealer did not have a 10 in their whole card. They would take your $25 chip away and you would lose it. And then the dealer would go through each person and they would play their hand. So you would play your hand, you have a 20, and say it gets back to the dealer and they flip over their whole card. And if they flip over 9, they also have 20, so you would push. You wouldn't lose anything on this $50, but you did already lose a $25. If you're into math or statistics, let me show you some of the odds. If your first 2 cards are 11 or lower, then there's a 0% probability you will bust on the 3rd card. If you have a 12, a hard 12, like a 6 and a 6, there's a 31% chance you're going to bust on the next card. In order to bust, you have to get a 10, jack, queen, or king. And obviously the odds go up if you hit. If you have a 20, you have a 92% chance of busting on the next card. The only way you will not bust is if you have an ace. You always want to play on a table that pays 3 to 2 for blackjack. If you get a blackjack, you get an ace and a king, and say you bet $100, the dealer would give you $150, your $100 plus 50%. So you would get your original 100 back plus 150. If you hit blackjack on a 6 to 5 table, and let's say you bet $50, the dealer would give you $60. So you get your original 50 plus 60. You don't want to play at 6-5 payout. Because if you play perfect basic strategy at a 3-2 payout table, the house edge is 0.5%, which means the house will win 50.5% of the time and you're going to win 49.5% of the time. If you play at a table that pays 6-5 for blackjack, the house edge shoots up to 1.9%. This is rare, but if you find a table that pays a 1-to-1 payout for blackjack, the house edge is 2.8%. So you want to avoid these tables at all costs. Only play at 3-2. So that's the end of the video. If you practice and manage your bankroll, you could definitely make money in blackjack, but there's no guarantees. You want to have a sufficient bankroll just in case you start off with some losses. And in the beginning, you're more likely to make mistakes. But as you improve, as you practice, the mistakes will lessen. But leave a comment or email me if you have additional questions. Thanks for watching.